A recollection of forms of spirit in James Joyce's Finnegans Wake. Continued. Quite a coincidence. That's from the Wake, by the way. In case you think I made some remarkable typos. Because we're going to be talking about coincidences. Hopefully you're not feeling lost. No more than I am, anyway. Right, off we go. We're still on the chapter where they are discussing the letter from Boston. It's an important chapter. Gives some insight in how we should be analysing the Wake itself. So, with somewhat fanciful earnestness, various theories and approaches to the interpretation of the letter are adduced, including textual, historical, Freudian analyses, to be followed by a discussion of the complexity and the elaborateness, the elegance and the charm of the letter, its arrangement of words, and the means by which its meaning may be deciphered. The letter, like the Wake itself, is intended to be keen again and begin again to make sound sense and sense sound kin again. I do like that sentence because rhythm is very important in the Wake, as I will get onto that later. Having considered a few artifacts concerning the original letter, it is apparent that the river Anna Livia, desirous of salt, flowed down towards the sea, whereupon she met Humphrey Chimpton Earwicker, whom subsequently the country wanted for his sin, and then it wanted dinner, and then it got rain, and those of Ireland a place strewn with clover. That's the four-leaf variety of clover, symbolising luck. Have oft observed the sky overreached the land. For it was once remarked by the Irish scholar, that stern chuckler mayhap not, Ireland was the one place in this vale of tears whose greenness yellows only when Phaeton parks his car the sun too close, and the tea-coloured Liffey is the dream of a would-be Ophelia, where the possible was the improbable, and the improbable the inevitable. Mayhap not is taken from Sir John Pentland Mahaffy, 1839 to 1919, who was an Irish classicist and polymath scholar. We who live under heaven, we of the Clovic kingdom, we Middleshin's people, have often watched the sky overreaching the land. We suddenly have our island is sing. The place that stern chuckler Mahapnot once said to repetition in that Lutheran conservatory way of his, that is at a chapel, a sit looking was the one place, ult out nult, in this made vale of Tars, whose verdures yellowed the river Phaeton parks his car, while its tame lies Tay is the drame of Drainophilias, that's Ophelia their reference, where the possible was the improbable and the improbable the inevitable. I will get on to what that's supposed to mean in a minute. Aristoteles, as you could probably guess, is Aristotle. Mahaffy had hit the nail on the head, then we are in for a sequence of Aristotelian improbable possibles. Aristotle's on the Vivel will go out of his way to applaud him on the unbiased back of his remark, for utterly impossible as are all these events, they are probably as like those which may have taken place as any others which never took place at all are ever likely to be. Because Aristotle said in his Poetics, with regard to poetic effect, a plausible impossibility is preferable to what is implausible but possible. Now, if a thing is impossible, one may wonder in what possible manner it could ever be probable. If he describes, this is Aristotle again, if he describes the impossible, he is guilty of an error, but the error may be justified if the end of the art be thereby attained. Humans, that's us, have a desire to know. And so our senses are loved for themselves even apart from their utility. However, the certainty of sensation may present objects in their differences, but it is the desire to understand that brings forth connections. Furthermore, the understanding search for explanations is primarily a description of what self-consciousness is in itself, in particular as it tussles with universality for its particulars that we experience through sense, and it is particulars that we experience through sense, and it is with universals that we think. The object of the understanding is thereby an unconditioned universal. It has no limits. Now, I haven't put the quote there on the screen as I should have done, but from Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, the unconditioned universal has no sensuous content, and I quote, "This unconditioned universal, which is now the true object of consciousness, is still just an object for it. Consciousness has not yet grasped the notion of the unconditioned as notion." Within the wake, it may be supposed, what it presents and what it suggests has no necessary limit and is not constrained by mere imitations of the actual world, for the domain of the possible stretches far wider than the actual. A world that implicates a logical contradiction is impossible, unthinkable, empty. Herein lies a problem for the understanding, for it is a mode of comprehension of limited range. One may well stipulate an alternative general order or set of laws for different possible worlds, and the laws of nature are simply a special case of a possible order, and which is valid in both actual and in physically possible worlds. Such a general order will determine a possible world by virtue of its function as a constraint upon that which is admissible into the possible world. Only those possible beings are admissible into the world as comply with its general order, and the set of all possibles is thereby divided into many different combinations of compossibles. But understanding is a grasping hold of the world while being in denial with regard to the role of its own activity in imposing its structure upon the world. At the same time, it evades any acknowledgement that this very structuring is unintelligible apart from the needs and demands of understanding itself. Explanation is a way of thinking about the world, and how the world appears turns out to be not independent from how the world is thought about. There is a contradiction between something related to itself and to another, and one is always looking behind the appearances to something else that is the essence, a reality behind the appearances that brings them about. And so the notion of force, the nature of which is a concept of the identity of oneself by or through another, a force of nature, or farce of nature, or feces of nature. Of course, Joyce plays around with this idea. There's scarce none in this gnarled world a fully so friend as dilates for the improvement of the forces of nature by your very ample solvent of refracting upon me like his boazen fiends. And elsewhere, the forces of nature in the wake are the feces of nature, and there is more to that than meets the eye. Shem the penman is ridiculed and disparaged in a Latin passage beginning, because there is actually a lengthy passage in Latin in the wake which is not translated, but it has been translated by Fagnoli and Gillespie, so I give some of it here. It begins primum opifex altus prosator. First the artisan, the profound progenitor, without shame or pardon, put on a raincoat and ungirded his pants, and with buttocks naked as they were on the day of his birth, while weeping and groaning, defecated into his hand, he pissed joyfully and melodiously, continuously singing with a loud voice the psalm that begins, "My tongue is a scribe's quill, writing swiftly." Finally, he mingled the odious excrement with the pleasantness of the divine Orion, and from this mixture, which had been cooked and exposed to the cold, he made for himself indelible ink. Because Joyce had a principle of artistic creativity, that is a kind of purgation, although in this passage in the wake it is actually literally purgation, evacuating the bowels. But his principle of purgation, that the artist must undergo of his sins and faults to absolve and vindicate himself through his art. Right. The very nature of something that is a force of nature is that it is so by or through doing this or that. So a force is only itself insofar as it forces, that is, utters or expresses itself. Only through entering a relation with others can force realize its identity. It is not immediately perceptible reality. It is recognizable beyond. It is a recognizable inner of some multiple expressions. To recognize a force is to understand that a single identity is manifesting itself through some total range of instances. One is always looking behind the appearances to something else, that is the essence, and looking at them as doing what is in effect the explanation. The force implicating a single identity, the dreamer in the wake in this case, expresses itself through recollection, the operation of which works upon three different levels. The epistemological or semantic level, where concepts of the present time and place do not in themselves pick out a determinate object. For epistemologically, such concepts can only be employed as universals, and as universals they are mediated, that is to say, they have an inbuilt negativity and complexity, and epistemology inescapably leads to metaphysics. There is the metaphysical exposition of space and time as the cycle of present moments, each infused with the past and the future, presents us with a conception of a temporal totality as the notion of the present moment is infused with the past and future. The phenomenological level is central, however, and what renders it so is the experience of forms of spirit. A teasy letter, because as I explained last time, the letter that they are analysing has a T stain on it, so it's a teasy letter. Inclined to tease, and stained with tea, and jotty or fragmentary notes, its watermark barely noticeable except when the sheet is held against strong light to reveal the hidden. And I quote from the Wake here: "Whether it be thumbprint, made mark, or just a poor trait of the artless, its importance in establishing the identities in the writer complex, for if the hand was one, the minds of active and agitated were more than so." End quote. The complexus that is an infinite continuum, like the Wake itself. So I have a quote there from the Philosophy of Mind. It is actually Hegel. It's actually from a footnote, but it explains his thoughts on infinity. Infinity, or this absolute unrest of pure self-movement in which whatever is determined in one way or another, for example as being, is rather the opposite of this determinateness. This no doubt has been from the start the soul of all that has gone before, but it is in the inner world that it has first really and dearly shown itself. Appearance, or the play of forces, already displays it, but it is as explanation that it first really stands forth, and in being finally an object for consciousness, as that which it is, consciousness is thus self-consciousness. The understanding's explanation is primarily only the description of what self-consciousness is. It supersedes the differences present in the law, differences which have already become pure, differences but are still indifferent, already become pure differences, but are still indifferent, and posits them from a single unity in force. The simple infinity, perhaps I'll get onto that later. It will turn out, and I'm quoting from the Wake again here, ensouling female sustains agonizing overman. And of course with overman there you can recognize a Nietzschean reference. The reference to the tea stain here foreshadows Anna Livia at the heart of the appearances, and as for tea, for Tristan or Humphrey Chimpton Earica, he is but a blot, a smudge. The understanding is where such tensions lead to, the whole process having considered something as universal in virtue of it having embodied what is specific and universal to it, encapsulating everything within itself. But the understanding is not aware of this and turns its back on itself, but at the phenomenological level, that something is seen as comprised of a universality as well as a plurality. Through recognizing this and turning it on itself, can the process of the perpetual movement toward a new concept transpire. And force is what makes it all come together, that which allows the solicitor by which I don't mean a lawyer, I mean the thing that solicits, that which allows the solicitor and the solicited being taken on and taking things on. Infinity is able to come into the world because no side of something that is a side of universality or a side of plurality is a thing in itself. They are necessary for either to exist and inseparable, and this allows for the absolute or infinity to make its entrance. Neither coincidences nor contingently random occurrences can accomplish this. There is a single unity in force, and infinity is the somewhat paradoxical truth that holds unity and difference together in a higher unity. So there's a passage from the Phenomenology there. This simple infinity, or the absolute notion, may be called the simple essence of life, the soul of the world, the universal blood, whose omnipresence is neither disturbed nor interrupted by any difference, but rather is itself every difference. As also their supersession, it pulsates within itself, but does not move, inwardly vibrates, yet is at rest. It is self-identical, for the differences are tautological. There are differences that are none. Infinity makes its entrance, yes. Right. There is a single unity in force, and infinity is the somewhat paradoxical truth that holds unity and difference together in a higher unity. Its structure was there from the very beginning, animating the dialectical progressions of forms of spirit, and only at the culmination of the dialectic of understanding has it freely and clearly shown itself. I distinguish myself, this is from the Phenomenology of Spirit again, I distinguish myself from myself, and in so doing I am directly aware that what is distinguished from myself is not different. So, to finish for now, a spirit that, just to explain that last passage, a spirit that apprehends infinity apprehends its unity with infinity, as well as its difference, and an object no longer stands opposed to it, and hence self-awareness emerges. As it said, I distinguish myself from myself, and in so doing I am directly aware that what is distinguished from myself is not different. The veil of appearance, this is my writing now, by the way, as most of it is, apart from when I say so. I'm just rather pleased with this. The veil of appearance that hung before the inner world is torn in two from top to bottom, as the two former extremes, the inner being of spirit and the inner being of the object, are united. Here it is that meaning and the forms of sensation, of perceiving, of the understanding, fade away. To be continued.